everybody, we got a great one today, for a change. And this time, I really mean it, because Molly Jong-Fast is my guest, and Molly's the best. She's always great. And this is her best one yet. She's on fire. It's tempting to say that we haven't had a great one since Molly was last on, but that just isn't true. I can't think of anyone right offhand. Okay, Ann Applebaum, she's always great. Frank Foer, usually great. Ben Wickler, the Wisconsin Democratic State Chair, that's a truly great one. You should check that out if you missed it. But other than those, the rest are pure dreck, absolute disasters. But this week, Molly Jong-Fast, we discuss a broad range of issues, among them the student unrest on college campuses. And I believe I say something along the lines of these students have every right to demonstrate or something. Whatever I said, I meant it. We shut down my college in the 70s on Vietnam and Cambodia. But there are some jerks, and I do have a problem with any kind of hate speech or harassment of students wearing yarmulkes or any anti-Semitic shit. And if you break into a building and occupy it and barricade yourself in, you're going to get arrested. And according to the NYPD, 29% of those arrested at Columbia were not affiliated in any way with the university. That's outside agitators among them. If you listen to this podcast, you've heard me since January saying that Israel should stop the bombing and that Netanyahu is a menace. But at the same time, we have to remember October 7th and Israel's right to self-defense. There is a deal on the table that Egypt has put together with the U.S. To have a ceasefire and the exchange of hostages for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. So far, my understanding that is that Netanyahu is considering it, but that Hamas has rejected it. Those hostages are exactly that, hostages. Anyway, Molly and I have a wide-ranging discussion, including the Time magazine cover story on Trump. Turns out that, among other things, Trump wants to round up, put in camps, and deport more than 11 million people. 11 million. Presumably that includes the parents of U.S. citizens who were born in the U.S. He wants to allow states to monitor pregnancies and prosecute people who violate abortion bans. Seems a little Orwellian to me. He would pardon all those who were convicted of attacking the Capitol on January 6th. The Time national reporter, Eric Cortellessa, writes, I ask him, and that's Trump he's asking, I ask him, don't you see why many Americans see such talk of dictatorship as contrary to our most cherished principles? No, Trump answered. I think a lot of people like it. So if you weren't for Trump before you read this story, you probably still won't be. Anyway, I got Molly Jong-Fast and a great one today, for a change. Hey, Molly.
Hi, Al. What's going on?
Oh, nothing much. Thanks for joining me, of course. And
of course.
So let's talk about, more about what's going on in the House than I certainly do. You're right about that for Vanity Fair very often. And so let's just start off with what's going on in the House right now. Is Marjorie Taylor Greene going to actually force a vote to oust Johnson?
I just want to for 2 seconds, there's so much really interesting stuff happening in the House and the Senate. And, I'm on the opinion side, and there are so many opinion writers, and I feel like they always swing at the same pitches. And they always run for the topic that is sort of the most controversial and not necessarily the most salient or the most interesting. And so we have this House of Representatives that is, can I curse?
Oh my God, yes.
that is a shit show like you've never.
Oh, that's what you mean by
before.
no, you can't do that.
Yes, and nobody's writing about it. So, I mean, except the people for whom it's their beat and they're, the straight reporters. So what's happening right now is that Republicans know that since their presidential candidate is sitting in a criminal trial, they may not have that much political capital to burn with the shit show that is the United States House of Representatives. And so they have decided not to kick out what is the third speaker of the term. And so they've decided the sort of critical mass, the Republican Party, has decided to keep Mike Johnson in. One of the really important things, I think, in this story that people don't necessarily talk about is that the reason they got rid of McCarthy was not because, the reason Democrats refused to protect him was because he lied to Democrats and they didn't like him and they didn't trust him. But the reason that Republicans really got rid of him was because Matt Gaetz decided he was mad at him. I mean, there may be more to this story, but a lot of it had to do with Matt Gaetz being mad at McCarthy for letting that ethics investigation go on.
How many Republicans voted against McCarthy? It was like 8 or something?
It was the Gaetz 8. And then he went on to fundraise off of it. And, and it was like the really unhinged crew, like the people that are his people, the Beauperts and
because right now the margin is 1, right?
Right now the margin is 2, but it will, there's
the
some
Long
weird
Island,
math, but right. But it's about to be 1 again.
Right. He's being sworn in.
Yes, because another Democrat is being sworn in. So what happened here is that Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was truly a nihilist, was like, that's it. I'm done with Mike Johnson because I want to just end American democracy. And, Thomas Massie, who's never seen a bonfire that he didn't want to throw the federal government in, was like, yes, let's go, because I hate this place too. And then they were like, can we find someone else? Paul Gosar. Mm-hmm. That guy's up for anything, right? From Arizona. You may know him from his ties to white supremacists. And so that crew were like, yes, we're going to get rid of Mike Johnson. This is not to say Mike Johnson is a good guy at all. It's just to say that this kind of arsonist crew.
His big sin, of course, was letting Ukraine funding pass.
Right. That was his great crime was money to Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel.
Does she object to Israel money and Taiwan money?
Yeah, she has issues with it. You'll be shocked to find out that the woman who rose to prominence on the lie that Jews have space lasers and start forest fires with those space lasers is also an anti-Semite. Look, the thing that is unbelievable about the House of Representatives right now is that they are the Republicans have decided they don't like anti-Semitism, despite the fact that last year that was kind of like quietly their thing. Now with the Israel stuff, they're like, we love the Jews. I say this as a Jew myself. I do not think these are our people.
So is she going to call the vote?
She said she had a press conference yesterday. She said she was going to call the vote. She's not going to win, right? She doesn't have the numbers. If Democrats continue to stick with Mike Johnson, what the Democrats are banking on the idea, again, you have one normal political party and you have one political party that is at best wacky and at worst authoritarian. I think she calls a vote unless she gets like 10 IQ points in the next week. I think she calls a vote, but I don't think it works for her.
And Democrats will have to vote for him. Will they just overwhelmingly do that? Decide, let's just do that?
Hakeem has a real handle on the caucus. So he can get them to do what he's a leader. He's like Nancy Pelosi. He gets them to do what they're supposed to do. This is a stark contrast to Mike Johnson. But I would also say this House is so profoundly, the Republicans are literally just there to try to run for office. You have Mike Lawler, doing an anti-Semitism bill. They had a week of appliances.
Now, the anti-Semitism bill was to denounce anti-Semitism.
It was, but the definition of anti-Semitism was broad in a way to make it, the bill was set up to be a little bit unpalatable, right? Like it wasn't necessarily that it was about anti-Semitism as much as it was about sort of trying desperately to divide Democrats on anti-Semitism, to say that Democrats are anti-Semitic.
I see. And it did that. It succeeded that there were Democrats voted against it.
It also divided Republicans too, because there are a lot of Republicans who are actually just anti-Semitic. But the goal of the United States House of Representatives, Republicans anyway, is to try to keep it and to try to win. They want to pit Jews against blacks because that is a group where we have worked together to fight for
civil rights
for people, civil rights, and Republicans hate that.
Okay, well, let's leave that and talk about a fun topic: abortion.
Yeah. That's right.
6-week ban has gone into effect in Florida.
Yeah.
Which means that a woman in Florida who wants an abortion.
Yeah.
Can't do it. 6 weeks is you barely know at 6 weeks. Some women don't know that they're pregnant at 6 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Florida was sort of the only state in the South where you could get this service, and now someone from the South has to go. Where can they go?
This is a super interesting. First of all, Florida has been more pro-choice than other southern states because Florida was at one point a purple state, maybe again, and also is a state that is a little bit more, I want to say, libertarian. Like they don't want people tracking their cycles, as opposed to other states which are fine with it.
And Trump is fine with tracking your cycles,
yes.
Evidently. That's in the Time magazine interview.
Yes. If states want to track women's cycles, who is he to say no to that? Besides, he has to go back to his trial with the adult film star.
We'll talk about that in a while. But that's very 1984, tracking someone's
cycles. Yes. But let's just, for Florida for a second. So Florida now has a 6-week ban. It was enacted by Ron DeSantis, likely because he thought it would help him win the presidential nomination because the base, the Republican Party
He
base,
ran a great campaign. I mean,
the best.
I think he spent like an incredible amount of money, right?
But mostly on private jet travel.
Okay, but that eats up a lot. But it was like $200 million or something. I mean, he spent an amazing amount of money and got, I think, 9 delegates out of Iowa, and then I didn't know whether he withdrew from New Hampshire before, during, or after New Hampshire. I couldn't quite tell.
Nobody knows. I mean, what's great about Ron DeSantis is that he is this whole idea that you should run terrible candidates who have horrible personalities and somehow this time voters are going to go for it. I mean, I just think it's a great idea and Republicans should keep going with it.
But did they know that? I mean, he had swept his last gubernatorial race and seemed very popular in Florida, and didn't it take him running for president to find out how terrible he was? The worst retail politician I've ever seen.
I liked it when there was a kid eating an icy, and it's like a 5-year-old in the state of I. And he goes, "There's a lot of sugar in that thing."
And there was, I saw a clip of him he asked a guy in a New Hampshire cafe. He says, "What's your name?" And the guy goes, "Tim." And he says, "Okay."
Yeah.
Not like, "Nice to meet you, Tim." Or, I'm Ron DeSantis. I'm running for president, Tim. Or, "You're my first Tim," or something.
Yeah. Well, my favorite thing about Ron DeSantis is that there were people in Florida, and this is where pundits and local news get into collision. But what I mean by that is that we should listen more to local news. People in Florida were like, "This guy, you could wait till you see this guy. This guy is not great." And everyone was like, "No, he's Trumpism without Trump."
Mm-hmm,
and yeah, maybe he is, but nobody wants that.
Yeah, they seemingly they want Trump. They want Trump.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, in the Arizona Senate, they voted to get rid of the 1864 law.
Yeah.
By two of them voted. Were they given permission by the caucus to vote, and everybody else could vote against it?
Probably.
Yeah.
I mean, so the Republicans control the Arizona State House. They had this, by the way, they were really upset. I mean, this is a situation where Democrats actually like saved Republicans, like the 1860 law, where it's like you can get 3 years in jail for performing an abortion, or like having a cookie with a woman who's not your wife or your servant. I mean, it was a law from 1860, 1860 before.
I didn't know
Arizona
that second part of the law.
But you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like in that law, it says you can lay with a 9-year-old if you have permission from her. I mean, it just, it's a very different way of thinking than we think now.
Okay.
And it was just a complete gift to Democrats in a swing state. And Democrats still tried to get it overturned, which they eventually did, because they knew that women would die. Now, the law that is enacted is this 15-week law from Doug Ducey, who is no longer the governor, lol, who was a Republican and who also, so this is not some great, it's not, they're not going to have some great situation there, but they do have a little bit more
was this the
leniency
House,
better than Florida.
Was this the Arizona State House or the Senate that voted this way?
It had to go through both, but I think that eventually they sort of figured out that they would just let it pass. But again, and the governor signed it into law, a Democratic governor, but there'll be an initiative there. There's an initiative already in Florida with the 60% threshold, which in Florida, there's a 60% threshold for.
Wow.
Yeah. In other states, normal states that are not Florida, there's a 50% threshold for ballot initiatives.
Yeah, the majority.
Right. But Florida is a little different because they don't totally believe in democracy.
Okay, we're saving Trump for last. So let's go to Israel and the college. And the college protests. I sympathize very much with the students who are doing this peacefully and in the right way. I protested when I was in college. I'm older than you and was able to do that.
Thank you.
I actually, at my college, when we had the strike, we had a strike meeting. I got up and spoke and said, let kids use the library. I remember that was like an issue.
Right.
And I said, everybody paid a lot to go here. And if they want to use the library, shouldn't they be able to use it? No, Al, no. Shut it all down. Shut it down. I go like, come on. These guys, their parents shelled out a whole bunch of money or they're on. Come on. I prevailed. That was my big thing. But anyway, so I have a lot of sympathy for the protesters. And I think that our policy, that we shouldn't be sending bombs to Israel.
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts on the politics of this? This is hurting Biden, right?
I think it's wildly unpopular, this war. It's tough. I mean, I think it's unpopular, and I think young people and I think a lot of us feel very uncomfortable with that. I mean, I think there's a broader issue, which is Americans don't like foreign wars on both sides. And that is a real paradigm shift. And that's we're far enough away from the Holocaust that other times we've gone into countries, we haven't done anything good. And so I think there's a real sense in which it's very hard to get Americans interested. For example, the Ukraine situation is like, we're giving them our old stuff.
The Ukraine stuff is that we are advertising our weapons too.
Right.
In other words, this is great for arms dealers, and like 90% of the money that we spend goes right here to making this stuff that Ukraine needs. And thank God we're able to do that. And pox on the Republicans in the House for taking 5 months to get to vote for this funding.
Yeah, that's my feeling is just that the sentiment has shifted. We don't, as Americans, don't love to be connected to foreign wars. I think that the protests are hard to deal with and that people have the right to protest. And I do think it's quite interesting to watch the people who are obsessed with free speech, furious about people doing free speech. But yeah, I think it's very tough, right? Free speech absolutists who are saying, like, send in the National Guard after those students.
I don't know how I feel about them taking these kids out and arresting them, but if they're breaking laws and they're destroying property and all that, and there are definitely protesters in there that are not respecting the law, right. And so you have to, law and order. Speaking of which, so Trump did this interview with Time magazine,
right?
And there's a whole bunch of stuff he plans to do, evidently, including rounding up 11 million people.
Yeah. Those deportation camps, they're not for you yet.
No.
Trump 2024.
So that's one of the things he's talking about, is rounding up 11 million people. So that would be supposedly every undocumented person in the country.
Not great.
And what would happen to our economy if that happened?
It's not so good. I mean, the reason that our economy is like the best in the world is because of immigration. So, but the thing about Trump, like what I love so much about Trump is that Republicans are like, he's really good on the economy. And then he gets out there and he's like, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put in huge tariffs. We're going to arrest everyone who works in all of those, everyone illegal who works in my country clubs, right? We're going to arrest them, and then Republicans are like, oh, it's so great. It's going to grow, it's just completely nonsensical at this point.
Yeah. I mean, his use of undocumented workers in his properties is well known.
Yeah.
And so he'll have to round up his own people. That's
right. Look, the idea that they're going to have deportation camps, that they're going to allow states to monitor women's periods.
Yeah. Talk about that. That literally is what the monitor pregnancies and prosecute people who violate abortion bans. So how do you monitor pregnancies? So this is very 1984.
It is 1984, but one of the things is that it's actually already happening in some of these red states. So there was a really great report from Lift, Louisiana, which talked about how actually Republicans, not even Republicans, so these states have doctors who are now practicing this profoundly defensive medicine. So if you're a gynecologist, OBGYN, in Tennessee, this is what they're finding in Tennessee. And my guess is they're also finding it. In fact, I know they're also finding it in Texas, Alabama. You don't want to see patients in the first trimester because you're much more likely to have a miscarriage in the first trimester, or something's much more likely to go wrong in the first trimester. So if you're an OBGYN, what you want is not to see a patient until they're 12 weeks, because it means that by the time they're 12 weeks, it's likely they're not going to have a miscarriage. Ergo, they're not going to go to the hospital bleeding and be like, my doctor is da-da-da, go prosecute them, even though they're having a miscarriage. Obviously, these doctors are worried about getting, accused of giving abortions. Also, the other reason they're not doing it is because if you're at 10 weeks and you don't have a heartbeat, right, you need a DNC or you need some kind of procedure to clear the uterus. And if you provide one of those, you're more likely to get prosecuted for giving an abortion. So here you have, I have a great example. So I have a friend who's a doctor, an OBGYN, and she's telling me a story of a patient coming from a red state so what happens in your first trimester is they track your hormone numbers to see how the pregnancy is holding. So 6 weeks, it's a number. 7 weeks, it's a higher number. 8 weeks, it's an even higher number. Once those numbers start to go down, that's when you know the pregnancy is not holding, you're having a miscarriage. This woman says to the New York doctor, look, my numbers are going down, but my Tennessee doctor says it's still a chance that it'll work out. And the New York doctor is like, no, it's not. The numbers go down because the fetus is not thriving and is about to die, right? It's not even a fetus at this point, it's an embryo. And this is why in 1973, 50 years ago, they decided Roe so broadly, was because you have doctors who are like, it might work out, because they don't want to provide a DNC. And that is where we are.
A DNC is, for me and for our other listeners, explain what that is?
So basically what you do is you go in as a doctor and you clear out the uterus of tissue. And you have to do it after a miscarriage. You have to do it. It's basically what the mechanics of an abortion are. But they need to be performed. It's a medical procedure. And because what happens if you leave tissue in the uterus, and this is like the sort of boring part, but it's actually kind of why we don't have crazy federal laws that involve medicine, right? For doctors that are like just because, crazy religious laws that somehow is that if you leave tissue in there, you can get sepsis and die.
Right.
You can lose your fertility. I mean, there are just a myriad of ways. Like we have modern medicine.
I think that this has caused a problem in a lot of states like Tennessee, I would imagine, where if you want to be an obstetrician, gynecologist, why would you go to medical school in Tennessee?
You don't.
You don't. And so those states are going to lose that service.
This is the larger problem with Republican policies, right? Like there's Medicare expansion available in red states, right? So your governor can expand Medicare, Medicaid.
In many of those states, people voted for it. It was on the ballot, and they said, Jesus Christ, Medicaid expansion is such a boon to rural areas.
Right. You're in rural Texas. Your hospital closes because it has no money. Now here it is. There's a chance to reopen these rural hospitals. And your governor's like,
No, I mean, that's exactly right. It's the best thing that happened to rural hospitals is Medicaid expansion. In Minnesota, I went around when the Republican healthcare bill would have gotten rid of Medicaid expansion.
Right.
And I went around rural Minnesota and they were pissed off.
Yes.
This is why we swept in 2018. Because that was a losing issue for Democrats until people actually discovered what the ACA was.
Right. I shouldn't laugh because it's so dark, but that's what
we laugh at, you and I.
Right. Right. But it's so true. And I mean, look, Minnesota's a great example. You have Governor Tim Walz. He has done free breakfast, right? Free breakfast for kids. Mm-hmm. And the Republicans were like, no, some middle-class kids might get free breakfast too. We don't want middle-class kids to get free breakfast with poor kids because we don't want them to be, we want the poor kids to know they're poor.
No, they're doing lunch too. They're doing, and this is all because they finally have the Senate and the House and the governor.
Right. And by the way, they should fucking feed children. We are a wealthy, wealthy country. Elon Musk gets billions of dollars in subsidies. Feed fucking children. Give them free breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Like, we should not have a single hungry child in this country. And it's bullshit. And I would love to see less tax and incentives for Elon Musk and more free breakfast, lunch, and dinners for poor kids.
Well, that's pretty controversial. I don't know.
It's called socialism.
Yeah.
Don't let children starve. I mean,
this is what you wrote in a great piece. None of this is normal. This is sort of your conclusion. That's why the media needs to call a lie and not worry if doing so appears partisan, while making clear that Trump's authoritarian agenda would mark a radical break from America as we know it. This isn't just another normal presidential race. And nothing has happened since you wrote this. That piece is about a month or so?
Yeah.
Nothing has happened in this trial to make us think any different, if not more so.
I think the trial has been, in my mind, amazing and a pretty good example of why you should just hold Trump accountable for doing crimes and not give him a free pass. I mean, if I had $1 for every pundit who was like, I think that if we hold him responsible, if we try to prosecute, if the government, by the way, it's not up to the pundit class, but okay, if the DA tries to hold Trump accountable, he'll be able to fundraise off it. Like, okay, first of all, like none of this, like this three-dimensional madness.
He hasn't really been able to, his fundraising is down, right?
Yes.
I'm afraid that doesn't matter so much, unfortunately.
No, I think that what matters is that we do the law for everyone the same.
I know. It's just... What kills me is that it's the January 6th case is the case that really should be happening now. Yeah. And that's the Supreme Court has made sure that won't happen before the election.
The Supreme Court, I mean, if you want to really be in a terrible mood, I suggest you listen to the oral arguments, Amdala, Trump versus United States. I mean, these are one is more, at every argument, you got Alito and Thomas coming in and being like,
yeah, you can kill your opponent. There is,
yes,
immunity from that. If you're president, Alito actually pursued that.
Yes.
That's crazy stuff.
Alito and Thomas have watched so much Fox News that at this point, they are basically a sort of amalgam of Marjorie Taylor Greene and Laura, whatever.
Ingraham.
Yep. Ingraham.
So you think the trial is hurting him?
I think the trial is over delivering, right? We were told that the witnesses were not good witnesses, that the case was a thin case. And in fact, like David Pecker he's been out there and he is just, what I've been struck by is he's delivered like really clear, really unemotional evidence that's got Trump on this issue. He did it to help him in the election. He did it after the Access Hollywood tape came out. He did it because he knew he would lose. Pecker knew that it was an in-kind campaign contribution because he called his attorney, the Inquirer attorney, who, even though that conversation is privileged, we know that the reason Pecker didn't give him the money wasn't because Pecker was mad about not being repaid. It was because he knew it was an in-kind contribution that would get run afoul with campaign finance, ergo the whole reason we're sitting in this case. So I think they've done an incredible job. And again, this is another place where punditry just said, oh, it's a bad case, it's this, it's that. But actually, like, this is how the law works. Like, you're not supposed to break it like that, especially when it comes to campaigns.
Well, I don't know how people look at it. And his people, of course, it won't change them. But
right.
The people that you hope it changes their mind are, people who've been, don't know yet where they're going.
Right.
And I think this will have an effect on them. Now, he doesn't seem to be enjoying it.
No, he does not seem to be enjoying it.
I think this is doing a number on him. I mean, having to sit there for 8 hours or however long he has to sit there has to be torture for this guy.
I mean, I don't think he likes that it's cold. He's very upset about how cold it is. He could bring a sweater.
Yeah, he could have like a sweater vest, but that's not his look.
But I was actually thinking about that the other day. I was like,
everybody would be shocked. That's the thing, because if he walked in there, the press would be going, "My God, he's wearing a sweater vest for the first time. Yeah. That long red tie is covered."
Yeah. So yeah, for sure, he could absolutely wear a sweater vest. I think he's quite unhappy, and he can't. What he's very mad about is that he can't tweet or do whatever.
Well, he has done. Yeah, it's a post
right
on his Truth Social. Is that what it is?
Yes.
Yeah.
They're called Truths. The irony abounds.
Right. He's been fined now for doing exactly that, for posting like attacks on the jury and on the judge, etc. And the judge has threatened that he'll actually put him in prison or in jail if he violates this again. He can't do that, can he? Will he?
He can. I don't. I mean,
he can legally, but I just think as a move, how about could he give him like detention at home, like ankle bracelet time?
Yeah, I mean, he could also just put him in there for an hour or two during the trial.
There is a holding cell in the courthouse.
But one of the things that I've been struck by with Merchan is that he does not want to have a mistrial, and he's really careful. He's a really careful judge. So, for example, there have been a number of times, like the gag order doesn't say you can't tweet against Judge Merchan.
Oh, that's right.
Which he could have said, right? I mean, usually a defendant tweeting about the judge, besides being stupid, is actually not okay. But instead he said, no, you just can't tweet about the families of the judge, right?
And he was about the daughter, right?
Right, it was about the daughter. So I think that's something. I also think that he's been really careful about, like, for example, he said to Trump, you can go to Barron's bar mitzvah. You saw where I was going with it.
You were going to Barron's bar mitzvah. He's graduating from high school.
Once a New York Jew, always. But yeah, he's graduating from high school. Trump has never gone to any of his other kids' graduations, but suddenly he's desperate to go to Barron's graduation. The judge says, well, let's see how we go on time. He goes to the right-wing media ecosystem and says, did you hear that? He's not going to let me to go to Barron. I love my fifth child with my third wife so much. I must be at his graduation.
Well, she's from Slovenia. Is that where she's from?
Yes.
And his first wife was Czechoslovakia, so he clearly wanted his blood poisoned. So that, or his kids' blood poisoned, so he could raise these super men.
So the end of the story is the judge makes sure that he can go. So he can go now, and now he has to go.
Now he has to go to the graduation.
Right. To sit outside in the heat for 9 hours watching kids he's not related to get pieces of paper.
And the question is will Melania be there, and will Melania ever show up in court?
And will Melania sit next to him? I mean, the fact he had no family there at all, and we in the mainstream media industrial complex commented on this, and so he got Eric.
Yeah, he got one of the supermen.
And I think Ken Paxton, too, like the Eric of the Texas government.
Oh, that's right. He came in to support, too.
Right. So there you got Eric and Ken Paxton.
So Trump has said, that he will testify. So here's my question to you. Will he testify?
No.
No.
Because
it would be...
it's terrible for him. It's not going to happen. I mean, maybe it'll happen. Look, one of the things that we've seen in this case is that Trump has had the lawyer do a lot of stupid stuff.
And he's criticizing his own lawyer now.
Right. And also the judge was saying to the lawyer, there was a moment between the judge and the lawyer where they both were like, you could tell that there was a sense in which the lawyer was not doing this because he thought it was the law, but because he had to appease his insane client.
Right now, at this point in the trial, it looks like guilty.
At this point in the trial, we've just seen so much evidence that is so clear and unemotional, and just that it is hard to imagine a world where these jurors don't look at David Pecker saying, and we did it because we thought we wouldn't get. And then there's an email later where they're saying, we did it. We got him elected. What have we done? Right. So there's so much evidence here. And then someone says, well, at least we'll get a pardon from him. I mean, clearly, this crew knew exactly what they're doing. So that speaks to motivation. So I think, yes. I mean, unless they have some juror who is worried about their family, right? Because there is, they work on these sort of organized crimey kind of rules. So if there's something like that, maybe. But my sense is that he's going to be found guilty here. That's my guess.
I think that maybe that it's an insurance policy. I mean, if one of these jurors gets kneecapped or something like that, it'll be pretty suspicious.
I mean, yeah, but Trump does suspicious stuff all the time, right? I mean, he says stuff where you're like, he can't possibly say this out loud. And then he's like, yes, I did. He'll confess to things.
So I asked you, did you read the Time magazine piece?
Yeah.
He basically is saying that he'll do the stuff we said he would do.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. You'll be surprised to know. I mean, it's like that moment with Sean Hannity, where Sean Hannity goes, "You're not going to be a dictator." And he's like, "I'm going to be a dictator on day one."
Yeah. But then he said for only day one. I mean, and he said he was joking, and he would withdraw from Paris, of course. He says that climate change was a hoax invented by China.
Yeah. Yeah.
He said that. He'll be a disaster. And I'm looking at right now, things like the Gaza war have been hurting Biden with young people, and it's been hurting him with Muslims in Michigan. So this is scary.
No, look, there's absolutely a chance that Trump could win. And if you don't think that, then you're a little bit delusional. Like, the Electoral College is a 6-state game. Right.
And it means that all my listeners and your listeners need to actually get off their butts and door knock
and phone calls. I mean, the other thing is, the thing I think a lot about is, we're a country of like 330 plus million people. And a very small percentage of them gets news from newspapers. So where are the rest of them getting their news? And you probably know 5 or 6 people, each listener, who is not getting the news from a sort of normal venue, who probably needs to talk to you about what's actually happening out there.
Well, we hope our listeners, your listeners and my listeners, listeners on Fast Politics, and mine here on the Al Franken podcast, the eponymous Al Franken podcast, that you guys got to get out there. And if you live in New Jersey, go to Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And someone will tell you where to door knock. And then if you find someone who's going to vote for Biden, you remind them to vote, and then you go back to headquarters and say, someone's got to go back to that door again.
Yeah.
And if you find a Trump supporter, then you go okay, no one contact that person about voting.
Right.
And that's how it works.
Yeah. And also,
I won my first race by 312 votes.
Wow.
So every vote counts, everybody, and it really counts in Pennsylvania and in Georgia and in Arizona and Nevada and Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania. Those are the states, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think Pennsylvania, Arizona, did we say Arizona?
We did.
Arizona. But look, but everywhere. I mean, Democrats win when Democrats are engaged. They do. I mean, why Democrats lost the House in 2022 was because in New York State.
Right. They didn't care about abortion.
They didn't care about abortion. And a guy called Ronald Lauder.
Yeah.
Yeah. Put gazillions of dollars into these Republicans in the House, people like Mike Lawler and D. Esposito, and they got in there, and that's how we had, the Biden impeachment, the vibes-based impeachment, which died when their key witness went to jail.
For being a Russian spy, basically.
Asset, yes.
Asset, okay.
Yes, right. No, a spy. I think a spy is fair. And California. So, I mean, there are these winnable seats there are 5 winnable seats in New York, 5 in California.
Josh Riley, who was my judiciary counsel, is running there, and he lost last time by 1.5 points. He ran ahead of Hochul by 6 points. Everybody up there in upstate New York in the New York 19th, Josh Riley, give him money, vote for him.
Josh Riley, Mondaire Jones, John Avlon. Democrats have really good candidates.
Really good pickup opportunities.
And really good pickup opportunities. By the way, if Democrats don't win the House, there's a chance that this Republican House refuses to certify for Biden.
That's right. And of course, they'll be sworn in before January 6th, right? They'll be,
right.
Oh boy.
Yeah, that's a little good nightmare fuel to
end with.
Yeah, I thought it's always good. Are you anxious? Because I'm here to make you more anxious.
That's what you're telling our listeners, not me.
That's right. No, not you.
Because it's hard for me to be more anxious about this election.
It's true.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening. That beautiful music is by Leo Kottke, the great Leo Kottke. I want to thank Peter Ogburn for producing this podcast. We'll talk again next week.